One of the questions that I'm being asked is, why have a common federal government in Israel Palestine? There are already governments there, or there is one government, or depending on people's point of view. Well, let's clarify this. There isn't a single legitimate, democratically elected government in the area of Israel Palestine. I mean the geographic area that includes the area of Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. The population in that area has never, ever in the history of humanity elected a legitimate democratic government. The Israeli government is not a legitimate government in the area of Israel Palestine. It has never given the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza the right to vote. And in a democracy, the people give the government the right to be the government. In other words, the people elect the government, not the other way around. In Israel Palestine, the Israeli government decides who are the people that are allowed to vote. That's not a democracy. That's not a legitimate democracy. The Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza have never been given the right to vote, even though they are under Israeli control. They have to abide by Israeli law. They have to petition the Israeli Supreme Court for grievances, including confiscation of properties or other issues. The Palestinian government have never given the Israeli people the right to vote, even when they had their last election approximately 20 years ago. So, let me repeat, there isn't a single legitimate democratic government in the area of Israel Palestine. I am proposing a legitimate democratic government for the people who live in the area of Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel, approximately 14 million people. And this government will give a veto power to the existing Israeli and Palestinian governments regarding laws that it passes that affect the sovereignty of the Israeli or the Palestinian governments. And it will be the common federal government who decide who to give the veto power to, and the standards upon which it will decide is whether the legislation that it passes requires the permission or cooperation of the Israeli or the Palestinian governments. It doesn't have to, under the Constitution, it doesn't have to give both of them at the same time a veto power, because if those governments or one of those governments is not, its permission is not required, then there is no point in giving them a veto power. And many are asking me, well, they're always going to veto the legislation. And the answer is not so fast, Because if the federal government, which will be the only legitimate government in Israel-Palestine, if it is able to obtain substantial number of votes and therefore legitimacy from the people themselves, and if it passes legislation that benefits the people themselves, whether they are Israelis or Palestinians or both, it will be very difficult for the Israeli or the Palestinian governments to veto legislation that benefits their own people by a government that has higher legitimacy in terms of democratic legitimacy than those governments. The president of the federal government will be able to insist upon furthering the legislation and, if necessary, pressuring the Israeli or the Palestinian governments not to veto the legislation. It may not require pressuring. They may see it for themselves, or they may want to amend the legislation if there are certain issues that they are concerned about, but overall willing to go along with the legislation. So a federal government that gives veto power to the Israeli and the Palestinian government is a good way to go forward in order to make peace. And the veto power is necessary in order to incorporate and give legitimacy to the Israeli-Palestinian federal government. But I meant incorporate the Israeli and the Palestinian governments whenever is necessary. Thank you.